All right, everybody. So, welcome to the first episode of season 9 of the Sirthos podcast, which is absolutely wild. And I'm actually pulling up my phone to double check that because I feel like it's just crazy that we're already in season 9, that we've been going for several years. And so excited to kick off this season with somebody who is new to the podcast and a little bit of a different platform. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about the music side of things tonight. So without further ado, take it away, introduce yourself, and we will go from there.
Hey everybody, I'm Izaki Metropoulos. I think primarily I'm a folk violinist. I've been playing violin for about 24 years now. Vast majority of those years have been playing Greek music almost exclusively. I dabble in various other styles, like what we call Balkan music, Bulgarian music, and so on and so forth. Also in some of the Ottoman classical stuff. And it's a really interesting life as a musician. You meet all different types of people. Your influences sort of come from everywhere as a sort of member of the diaspora as well. And so, but yeah, that's the sort of long and short. Other than that, outside of being a musician, I hang out with my sister's cats and all that good stuff.
Awesome. We've definitely seen those critters on your Instagram. At least one of them, I feel like you have like a black one, right? Or she has a black one. Yeah.
Such a personality.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. I feel like there could be a whole episode on the cats of Greece as well. Maybe we'll explore that at some other time.
Oh.
So talk to us about how you got into violin, like what even differentiates like a folk violinist versus somebody who might be more on the, like, let's say classical side or, orchestral side, if you will. Talk to us about that. Walk us through that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, had kind of an interesting musical journey. So I started violin at 5 years old. Basically, it was a school called Music House, and they offered a program at the school that I went to. I went to a pretty small school, and I was one of the crazies who sacrificed his recess and his like after lunch hour in order to learn to play violin in sort of a group setting. And so we started with the Suzuki method, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with if they studied violin. Sort of a cookie cutter classical training, more or less. But what I also liked about that environment as well was that Music House is really good about introducing us to like different fiddle tunes and stuff like that. I grew up playing also some like Mexican folk music on violin, which was really cool, as well as several sort of American bluegrass tunes and stuff like that. So when I started playing violin, I sort of was exposed to everything at once. We didn't have Greek music in the family, or Greek musicians, that is. And my exposure to it was through recordings, essentially. And so I have been a dancer since I was young, and I started Greek dance at Greek school, like many other, those my peers. And when I was 10, I joined the Orpheus Hellenic Folklore Society. And around that time, I got 2 different mix CDs. And one of them was from my Greek school, and the other one was from Orpheus. And I remember there was a tune on one of the mixtapes called Yes, which is a very famous tune from Naxo that I still play to this day. It's like one of my favorite pieces. And, it's sort of, I was introduced to it spontaneously in a way because, as I'm sure many are familiar with, when you practice to mix CDs, it's like, you practice to track 12 and then track 13 cues. And then you have to shut off track 13 very quickly. And so, track 13 or whatever it was Yes. And I was like, what is this really cool, this cool piece? So I convinced my dance teacher at the time at the academy to make me a little mix CD of it, because I told him I played violin, and sort of simultaneously in Orpheus, we got a mix CD with a bunch of dances from different regions to theoretically practice dancing to. I did not do that as much as trying to learn the violin pieces by ear, and then it just sort of snowballed after that point. I was very fortunate at a young age to meet really legendary clarinet player Jim Stoyanov, who is a fixture in the Chicago area. And we played together for years, and he showed me, even though he was a clarinetist, various approaches and things like that. We sort of learned through osmosis as musicians. I never had a formal Greek teacher to teach Greek music. But you learn so much through playing with very, very talented musicians that you just inevitably sort of pick things up. And so ever since then, my journey has been through the Orpheus Hellenic Folklore Society, basically taking on various musical projects with like Anthony Plattis, who also another awesome guest on this podcast. But if he has an idea for an island or something like that, or representing, usually we focus on Cyclades. If there's an island in the Cyclades that we'd like to focus on, he'll sort of give it to me, and then it'll become my homework to sort of figure out all the nuances and stuff like that. But yeah, most of my musical journey has been playing by ear and sort of literally and figuratively. So yeah.
It's so interesting that you say playing by ear because I think that's more common than we think. And certainly obviously because you went to school and you learned how to do this, I'm sure you can read music, but I think there's also something that activates like a different part of your brain when you can play by ear where it might be like a little bit more authentic or just you kind of like figure it out. You like push yourself to that. So how does that work? Like if somebody doesn't necessarily know what playing by ear is versus reading music, tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So I'll start off by saying this, a little self-incriminating as a musician, but so I do read music. I can read music. But when I started, so I did about 5 or so years of that classical training and where we did fiddle and stuff like that before I quit and started learning Greek stuff by ear. And what I used to do, because to be honest, I never had the attention span to sit and read the notes on the paper, and I just couldn't hear it in my head unless I heard the melody. And so I used to just listen to the recording over and over again and then fake reading the music. And so, and what's kind of funny is that, Jim, that clarinetist, had the sort of same experience
Yeah.
in high school until his teacher sort of put him on the spot and said, "I don't think you know how to read music." And thankfully, I never went through that sort of humiliation, but
Yeah.
I was able to bail to the Greek music world. And it's interesting, and you bring up such a good point, which is that I think that most people who sort of casually dabble, they start doing that. They start like hearing a pop piece or hearing some kind of piece and then figuring it out on
Mhm.
their keyboard at home or something like that. And that's such a critical element of folk music. And it's hard, I think, for many people who are really, really classically trained, like really, really classically
Mhm.
trained, to migrate from classical music to Greek folk music because they're sort of going from this written to a fundamentally oral tradition
Mhm.
in which the skill set demands that you have a really good ear and you're able to transpose on the fly and things like that.
Mhm.
And many folk musicians, if they talk to classical musicians, they go, a lot of times classical musicians say, "How can you do that?" And
Mhm.
it's really like speaking a different language or developing a different skill set. It's not that one school is necessarily better than the other. It's just you develop various techniques that are just work for one school over the other.
Yeah, yeah. It's lately I've been like, so back in the day, I started with violin as a kid. That was like a thing, right? In my day, everybody sort of had like an instrument that they picked up and people would like drag a tuba home and all this kind of stuff. And I didn't last that long because I liked to like have my nails painted and with clear nail polish because
Of course.
obviously, Greek mom, like you can use clear, that was it. And you can't have long nails when you play violin. So I switched into clarinet and a few other kind of like wind-based instruments. Today, I, like, rack my brain and I'm like, "Okay, I can read in terms of, like, you know, quarter note, eighth note, whatever." Um, but I cannot remember for the life of me the scales. Like, I can remember FACE, but I can't remember, like, the other acronyms, you know what I mean? I'm just like, "What the heck was that acronym?" Because that's, like, how I learned. I was talking with a friend about this, and I'm like, I would read music. Like I remember in band we would read music, but then you also space out. You know what I mean? It becomes
Totally.
there's a part of like muscle memory and I'm like that's probably why I was never like first chair or anything. So I'm sure the instructor was like this chick is just in her own world like jamming out on her clarinet. But you just kind of you get into it. Like there's a somatic part to music. It's the same thing with dance, right? Like if we teach dance 12 steps on the 11th, you're doing this, da 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 da. We're missing a massive part of like the dance, just letting your body feel it and like organically syncopate something, you know?
Absolutely. And like as a folk musician, it's very hard to be just a musician and not a dancer because of course the music is meant to support the dancing and like
Mhm.
every one of my really memorable interactions playing for different groups of people has been you know has involved connecting with the lead dancer or the dancers in some way. There's a way that sort of intuitively you understand how to carry people and carry the rhythm and where to put the accents on certain beats. um like the Sirto from Naxos is a great example. And there's something about I was just there
Mhm.
back in July into early August. And, having danced these dances for a while, there was something about being able to just be in that line and you're sort of receptive to ways that people sort of, subtly, pull and things like that. And the flat footedness of the first and the fourth step. And there's so much, and not just the variations, but the feel of it in general. And that's like and so it's sort of counterintuitive often, I think, as a musician to think I need to approach this as a dancer, but it's absolutely necessary because if you don't, the rhythm is going to be off. I mean, there's just going to, you're going to be sort of out of touch with the people you're playing for.
Hmm.
And the same goes for dancers, right? If you're a dancer and you don't listen to this music consistently, something is going to be off. You're going to be in a situation where, you can only dance to a particular recording, for example, or
Yes.
you're only able to, I mean, you have a very sort of limited adaptability. And it's because you're not immersing yourself really in the way that this folk context has always existed, right? Which is the
Yeah.
symbiotic relationship between the music and the dance. And
Yeah.
so without that component, immersing yourself similarly, you just lose so much of the nuance and you can't feel it at the
Yeah.
end of the day.
Yeah, no doubt. I think there's something really cool about watching musicians play. And again, I don't know if it's like just how my weird brain is, but like I have a vivid, vivid memory of last year at HDF watching you and your sister on top of the table, just like jamming out. And it was like like your body movements, your energy, your presence. And I also I feel like maybe I identified it with it a little bit more with your sister because I'm just like, holy cow, like she is just conveying, like not conveying, she's captivating, the room there and really like the pulse of the group almost. But it was just so neat to watch you guys, like, because it was almost like if for me, if I was watching you all, I was anticipating, it was like foreshadowing just with that little brief bit of what was going to happen on the dance floor.
Right. Yeah.
It was awesome. Awesome.
And Sophia is such a, you bring up such a great point. Like Sophia has, really honed in on being, this sort of rhythmic
Mhm.
center of things. And she has such a good ear for the chords. And one thing that she does really, really well is she's able to pick up all those sort of subtleties of it. And, what's interesting about the type of music we play is that, of course, it's not really ensemble music. If we're playing Nisiotika, it's
Sure.
violin lauto at the end of the day. And
Yeah.
the lauto has to play the role of percussion and chords at the same time if it's just a duo. And that's very, very hard to do. And so it lends itself to certain picking styles and things like
Mhm.
that. And certain chord shapes that bring out a little bit more of a rhythmic quality to them, more of a percussive quality to them. She really goes to the drawing board with like the types of picks to use and certain islands that we're on. It's like, okay, well maybe we'll use this thinner pick because an island like Sifnos or something like that, you'll hear sort of that more I don't know how to describe it. There's just something less full about the sound. It's
Sure.
more sort of, I don't want to say fluid, but it's like a little bit
Yeah.
versus like the dun, 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 that you have with Nam.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was in the time, but
So
she's
cool.
very perceptive to those things. She's sort of a rhythm specialist in that.
Yeah. Too. We'll have to have her on the podcast too as well. I think that would be so cool. Talk to us about like how do you, if you fall into kind of a rut, you know what I mean? Like a writer's block for a musician or whatever. How do you sort of extricate yourself out of that? Or how do you keep on, like, obviously this is your passion, this is your driver, but we still need like an outlet, right? How do you handle that?
That's a really good question. And like part of it is, I really try to view my sources as sort of to get like psychological, like intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And if I find that my environment isn't structured in a way to encourage me to play music in some way that it's sort of out of sight, out of mind.
Hmm.
Some ways to actually do that are like, I'll be proactive about, finding a show or something like that or
Hmm.
having some event. Most recently, we had a Nisiotika here in
Hmm.
Chicago. That was an absolute blast. And, Sophia and I had sat down and we are like, okay, we're going to learn, in a span of a couple of weeks, 50, 60 songs from Naxo alone, just to
Oh,
really, really hammer it. And we, sort of, you provide that sort of scarcity that you need to kick in that procrastination. So part of it is just sort of know thyself, I guess. Like
totally.
if you operate on putting fires out, maybe you should live like that to some extent instead of
Yeah.
forcing yourself to be something you're not. But so that's kind of how we do it, in a sense where it's just like, okay, well, we need things to structure our practice. We need reasons to practice. A lot of, what we also do is so communal because we're involved in the dance group as well. And so there is something about having sort of building that sort of village atmosphere in which now my close friends want to hear a specific piece from Naxo or something. They want to
Hmm.
hear Sophia sing Yavas Yavas or whatever.
Hmm.
And there's that, it's like almost like we replicate, what people have done in the village as
Yeah.
diaspora. I mean, to some extent, of course, it's not as
Totally.
integrated, but that actually helps so much in the motivation process. The other thing that really helps is that I mean, Greece is such a obviously musically diverse country. It's like this east meets west, sort of area. And I'm really interested in looking at all these influences on Greek music, or the influences of Greek music on other repertoires, other countries, and sort of going down that rabbit hole and things like, I find something new to challenge me, but I try to, integrate it back into sort of generally what I focus on. So those, I think, techniques sort of help me get through the rut.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. And I can definitely appreciate the whole idea of like, if you work better a little bit under fire, like capitalize on that. Don't try to be like, type A, I'm going to get everything done and, 2 weeks early, because if that's just not your motivator. And that's totally cool. I think I love that know thyself thing. I think emotional intelligence is a cornerstone to success in adult life, and just understanding like what kind of what pushes you is really good. Cause I feel like in all of this, and, this can translate to careers and stuff like that, you have to have some sort of driver inside you that's going to push you to put in all this time and effort and talent, right? Time is our most precious commodity. I can definitely appreciate that. Although I'm sure I would not tell my students to procrastinate, but I will say it's totally okay here. If it's your
For
thing,
sure.
do it.
Yeah.
Cause
Or
I
at
do
least
it
set
too.
deadlines. Like,
Exactly.
deadlines are helpful.
Yes, no doubt. No doubt. They absolutely are, even if they don't necessarily mean anything to anybody else, without a doubt. So I wrote down the word influences. Who are your professional influences? I want to go there first. And then I'd love to hear also what you think about influences in terms of music and the history of music in Greece as well.
Right. Okay, awesome. Um, Professional, I mean, I can start with sort of professional music influences if that helps.
Hmm.
So what I like doing is, and this sort of like my overall philosophy with Greek music in general, with studying folk music, is immersion in the same way that you would approach a language. I think that if you have classical training, or if you grow up in the States in general, your frame of reference is Western music, or Western classical music, and sort of Western theoretical approaches to music. And so one concept that people talk about a lot are scales, right? And they go into Greek music asking, what are the scales in Greek music? Greek music is not that. I mean, if you go to the Ionian Islands, you'll see a lot of the Venetian
Hmm.
influence. And in the style of singing, you have that sort of Italian bel canto approach to it, the almost operatic, and harmonies fit neatly into it. And there are some regions in Greece in which harmonies do not neatly fit. And you'll have to sing, I mean, if you want to do what resembles a harmony, you're going to sing what's closer to like a Byzantine, like ison, isokratima, like that usually a fourth below the note that you're singing, that drone note that sort of supports everything. And the reason behind that is that a lot of this music stems from a tradition that is monophonic, right? It's written for multiple sort of solo instruments that overlap each other, not necessarily with the idea of a chord structure. And so what's interesting about Greek music is I sort of view it as like the intersection of existing folk traditions and things like that. There is some Western influence depending on where you are, but a lot of it is Byzantine, and a lot of it is like Turkish Arabic makam and the makam system from the East that sort of came in and influenced everything. And you see that even in some of the compositions that make their ways into the islands. Naxos has a huge sort of influence from the sort of Ottoman classical, because of the people that lived in this community and heard that music. And Naxos also had close sort of geographical proximity to get a radio signal. And so people heard some Turkish pieces on the radio and then adapted them, but also they're bringing
That's
their own
wild.
traditions to Zmijani. And so there's that whole sort of melting pot,
Yeah,
before the catastrophe, right? This is a very
sure.
cosmopolitan area. So you're going to get a lot of that sort of musical influence, and sort of the flow of migrants back and forth, and people going to Zmijani for work, women working as wet nurses, and so on
Hmm.
and so forth, and coming back to Naxos. So, and that reflects in the tradition and the scales that they use in particular, and scales that you would typically hear in Middle Eastern music, but are in Naxos for some reason, that being the reason. So what I heard, this is not my idea. This is somebody else's idea. I forgot already. I'm so sorry.
You're
But
okay.
what's interesting about this sort of makam or this sort of Eastern modal music is
Mhm.
that it's much more like a language. So instead of learning do, re, mi, solfege, sort of several notes in a scale, you're learning phrases
Hmm.
of a particular musical note families, right? Like a kind of like a scale, but imagine the first four notes of the scale that are then interchanged with the, five notes of another scale or four notes of another scale. And it's very much like how we learn languages, right? We don't learn, a syntax necessarily and then learn the language. We learn it intuitively and through
Totally.
speaking with others and then learning certain phrases and recycling them together in certain contexts. And that's how this music works typically.
Mhm.
Without that sort of approach to it, learning it as a language, learning it sort of immersively, you lose so much of the nuance because you're
Mhm.
trying to apply more Western approaches that are meant to be played in a concert hall. They're not as organic, theoretically speaking, I suppose. But and so sometimes I get a lot, feedback from people saying when I try to do this music, something feels off, and it feels off for a variety of reasons, and that's certainly one of them because it's like, well, what's the scale? Well, it's not necessarily a scale. So it's like you kind of have to learn it like you would watch Greek Netflix all the time to learn Greek or something like that. It's
Yeah.
just like that essentially.
Yeah. There's a ton to unpack there, and it's so interesting too because like when people say like, "Oh, I heard that song," or like, I have a very good friend who's Turkish, right? We went to graduate school together, and he's like, "Yeah, we have that same song in Turkey," right? And people might get a little jazzed up about that comment, but what he's referring to, right, is there's a translation, an easy translation of music in sort of this Greek, Turkish, Balkan area, right? It doesn't necessarily work the other way. Like you can't I feel like in the States, probably the closest thing to Greek folk music would be like real, for real bluegrass stuff. You
Yeah,
know,
totally.
like
Yeah.
you just can't, like what you were saying, you can't necessarily translate it. There's not a way, like it's not a chemical equation where you can just replace this with this because you're going to lose or you're going to totally fall off the trajectory of where the song was going or the lyric or the phrase or whatever it might be in music. So my brain is like spinning. I feel like that was a lot to take in.
No, totally. It's like when you're playing, yeah, it's almost like a product of its environment in a sense where it can't
Hmm.
be, literally translated or written on paper
Hmm.
because you have to be in that context. I mean, I think that sometimes we have very fixed ideas of like ethnic folk identities in
Hmm.
general. But our own identities is like, let's just say Greek Americans, is that like we're constantly surrounded by pop culture and all these influences that influence in our music taste. And so no different than living 19 Zmirny or something like that, where
Totally.
you're hearing Armenian and you're hearing Turkish musicians and Sufis and things like it's part of the cultural fabric. In the same way, I mean, you learn through osmosis, and these are sounds that you're hearing, and then you're bringing them back, and then your tradition then becomes a sort of hybrid of those traditions. So it's in dialogue. It's not like this is a fixed idea of what this music is and so on and so forth, because it's so cool. If you go back in Naxo, that same piece, Azizies,
Mhm.
is you can trace the roots of it. Actually, there's like research by Stavros Piliakos, like very, very famous, of course, like researcher from Naxo.
Mhm.
Who, there's also a great thesis by a violinist, Theologos Michaelis, that's on the internet somewhere. You can get a
Interesting.
free PDF of it. And the thesis is actually all about that song, Azizies, and how essentially you have this like the original, which is kind of this Ottoman classical piece, ascribed to Abdulaziz, Sultan Abdulaziz,
Mhm.
but it could have
Interesting.
been written by him. It could have been written by one of his court composers. That the jury's
Sure.
not out on that. But
Yeah.
but regardless, that's where we get Aziz Yes, and then it becomes adapted into a sirto, one of Greece's like oldest folk dances,
Yeah.
through the sort of musicians going back and forth for work between Naxos and Smyrni, or
Mhm.
as refugees after the catastrophe. And so of course, people learn this sort of repertoire because they're working musicians. Like, if you're
Mhm.
a gigging musician, you're going to learn whatever you need to learn at the end of
No
the day. And
doubt.
so, and
Yeah.
you're going to bring that back and adapt it in a way that people want to hear it and dance to it. And then it
Yeah.
becomes something. And so, and
Yeah.
it for that reason, there's an Aziz Yes in Kipro, there's an Aziz Yes in Hio. There's so many different versions of this song wherever you go. And it sort
Mhm.
of traces back to that sort of interaction between all these groups of people in one place. So, yeah.
So cool. That's so, so cool. Talk to us about your musical inspirations. Like, people wise? Is there somebody who you always go back to? And it doesn't have to be, a folk artist. You could be like, yeah, Pearl Jam, love them, whoever,
Yeah, yeah. You know what? I do listen occasionally to Pearl Jam because, as a kid, like I was such a fan of like the Guitar Hero series. I
Totally.
would go by my cousin's house and play it on his like PS2 or whatever.
Yeah.
But in terms of Greek music, I like to listen to violinists that really make me feel something. And generally, the violinists that do are the most gifted masters of the taksimi, or these sort of improvisations that occur either as a solo during a piece or before. And I find that that's kind of a lost art in a lot of ways. And I think it's because also how fast music is and how fast we expect to dance to the music. It's like we can't sit with ourselves and kind of listen to it, but there's something that is so meditative about it.
Yeah.
And the violinist that I listen to maybe the most is Stathis Koukouladis, who is he is, one of the best violinists to come out of Naxos. And there's a great video on YouTube where he's doing like a 7-minute taksimi. And this cameraman, God bless the cameraman, zooms in on this grown man and he's like crying. And then he pans over to this other woman. She's like crying.
Yeah.
And there's that connection there because the guy is just pouring his soul out into his instrument. And it's not just emotion in his technique, but it's his mastery of the makam and how he's able to weave his way around different, of course, like what we would refer to as scales in the West, but as
Sure.
we have established, not really. But,
Yeah.
he's a master of this musical language and he uses it in a way to express every joy, pain without any
Mhm.
lyrics. And there's something so magical about that. And in that video, everybody's so sucked in. So when people ask me who should I listen to as a violinist, I usually start by saying Stathis Koukouladis for that
Yeah.
reason. Technically, there are people that will just, wow you but there's something about his approach. There's a phrase that I actually have heard. I say it, and then I heard somebody from another culture, I think it's a Bulgarian guy say it, like a good taksimi tells a story, right? You start at one place, like a solo. Like you listen to a good guitar solo,
Mhm.
and it starts you in one place, and then it goes here, and then it leads you back here. And that's exactly how a good taksimi is, and in a way that carries you, right? It doesn't try to wow you with the
Totally.
showmanship. It tries to put you and immerse you in the story. It's so hard to explain that musically,
Mhm.
but so he's like my number one inspiration. And
Yeah.
because you listen to him and he sort of informally tells you, slow down, listen to
Yes.
this, which is
Yes.
so important.
Yes. I think that's a beautiful thing to witness too. Like, when you're at a show, especially in Greece, and it's like, we're not ready yet. You know what I mean? Like we're easing you in here and like we're gonna mark the pace of this, and they certainly don't say that, but they invitation to get up and dance doesn't come right away. It's not like a light switch that goes on, depending
Yeah.
on where you're at, right? Like I was at a show this summer and I was kind of expecting that. I was expecting the person to like really like jazz us all up and like, open it up and set that tone, and it didn't happen. It was sort of just like, rip the Band-Aid off. Okay, let's go. And I was like, right. And it was still fun. Like, don't get me wrong, I had a great time. Great, awesome time. But it went like 0 to 60. And I'm like, I'm gonna need you to like rev the engine a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
So
Exactly. Start your car in the winter. It's like that sort of thing.
exactly.
Like warm it up.
Yes, no doubt. Yes. And if you've never experienced having to start your car like 20 minutes before you drive it, I'm sure, Chicago, you could go there in the winter and experience that.
And I really hope that the more the diaspora get involved in the Greek
Mhm.
dancing, that they develop a love for the traditional music outside of the way that it's distilled in popular Greek music.
Yeah.
Because the music almost teaches you how to be a better dancer as well. It teaches you to sit and listen to it,
Mhm.
which is so important as it. And all the best dancers, they they all have one thing in common, which is restraint, right? They can
Mm.
do all the amazing things, and then they choose not to and in a way that it's so visible. That's like this guy is a complete master of the craft, of
Mhm.
himself, of his mind, whatever, right? I mean,
Mhm.
there's something that the way that they take their time that just signals confidence. It's all these things, and I feel that the more live music is sort of integrated in a lot of these dance groups and so on, I think the more that people will sort of shift from, sort of like a mixtape iPod mentality in which now we're going to play thrakiotika, now we're going to play pirotika or something like that, or now we expect that, or to switch gears in the middle of an Nisiotiko set going right to like
Mhm.
thrakios. It's just it doesn't, it's
Yes.
ridiculous. I mean, I think it's a little ridiculous because
Yeah.
it's it, you shouldn't be in a hurry to get anywhere. You should enjoy, sit with it and enjoy it and sit with yourself and there's a real beauty in that, of
Mhm.
being able to just to sit with that. And yeah, and I think that, and I see it for some of the groups that I end up performing for is that they develop that
Mhm.
over time, because they understand the weird, the spontaneity of live music and how to adapt to that sort of thing. And, if you're playing a piece and then the musician slows down the piece, it's like, are you going to hate that the musician slows down the piece? Or are you going to then find that as an opportunity to really show some different variations that will only come out if it's a slow piece? Like,
Really.
there's something about a great contrast is between, a group of people that knows how to dance samuriko,
Mhm.
like a very slow ikariotiko,
Mhm.
versus a group that dances the remix barrio version or something. And it's like they're running. It's like you don't have to run. This is a
Yeah.
beautiful dance if it's
Yeah.
done, you take your time with it and you look better as a dancer too. But these
Yes.
things I guess you pick up over time.
Well, totally, and it's so there's a few things, that you said that sparked, like, different ideas in my mind, like, when we think about and I don't wanna always bring this back to performances and stuff like that, but when we think about what we're trying to recreate in some of the performances that people do, where it's like, "Oh, yeah, part of the group is sitting at the tables and watching, and part of the group is dancing." Why are you doing that? It's not just because the stage can't fit everyone. It's you're creating that, like, "I'm not ready yet to get up." Like, I'm
Yes,
still easing myself in, and it's an interesting thought because I don't know if people default to thinking about that as the reason why, I don't know if, like, maybe some instructors teach that way, but it's like, that's a really important thing because you're not just sitting there, like, waiting to get up there because you gotta go show off. You're recreating kind of how it should be, like, that it's you're waiting for your time to step in, you know?
exactly. And I think that that's, to some extent, it's like the double-edged sword of living in a performance culture. It's just, on the one hand, and I feel like the groups that go to the competitions and things like that,
Mhm.
it's just as important to take that home with you and
Yep.
recreate exactly what you're trying to portray. And, when you experience it in person, there's something about you just carry that with you all the time.
Mhm.
And there's something about Adoni probably mentioned this, but when in
Mhm.
2017 we went to Xia
Mm.
and we had an opportunity to, I mean, meet with the local musicians, and it turned into this huge event, this spontaneous, we expected, Kiro Adoni
Yeah.
bring, 4 or 5 people, as it often goes with folk research, and
Totally.
you're in somebody's crowded apartment or something like that, and,
Yes.
but then it was like, "Oh, let's go to this restaurant. Oh, there's 40 people here. There's 45 people," or however many
Yeah.
people were there, and it was this beautiful moment because, we knew a lot of that repertoire, and so we sort of immediately fit in, and we're able to just, "Oh, let's play this piece. Let's play this piece," and it was this real, I mean, real familial sort of environment, and there was this, yeah, there was a patience to it all. There was like, okay, well, now I'll sit down and have a drink. Now I'll sit down and whatever. Now I'll get up and now I want to do a couple of things and I'll go sit back down.
Yeah.
And unless you've experienced that, it feels so artificial. It
Mhm.
feels completely like like a performance. And you can't just, you can't flip a switch and say I'm no longer performing if you
Sure.
don't have any other frame of reference. You're going to think, well, it's like somebody saying like, with acting, right? Like try not to look like you're acting. It's like, what the hell does that mean? Right? It's
Exactly.
like, or whatever they say,
Thanks.
Right, right, exactly. Yeah, but it's different if you have a frame of reference and you access those memories that then allow you to look like you're not acting and so on. I mean, there's so much there. But yeah, that experience. So, for all those groups at HDF, I would suggest have a collegio of your own where you bring
Mhm.
live music and do that very same thing, even
Yeah.
before HDF, because it
Yeah.
trains your group to respond to all these things. They'll just become better dancers and all those weird unspoken aspects like sitting down and doing this, and
Mhm.
you'll feel like, okay, I'm just dancing with my friends, right?
Yeah. No doubt, no doubt, and, um, I think the other thing that kinda came to mind, and this is, like, a little bit hippy dippy, I understand this, that some people might tune this out, pun intended. Like, there's frequency in sound, right? And there's, there's a bunch of YouTube videos about this where at different hertz levels, right, which is measure frequency, a glass will shatter with prolonged exposure to said sound. And sometimes we can hear that sound, other times we can't hear that sound, right? It doesn't shatter right away. You know what I mean? It takes time. It could be split seconds. It could be kind of that it's wearing it down. It's breaking down the, crystalline structures of the glass and blah, blah, blah. Um, but I feel like if people have been to folk shows before, like in Greece or here or whatever, and you haven't really let the frequency of the music like hit you here, hit you in your chest, like wherever you feel it. Some people feel it, here, some people feel it in their heart, their gut, whatever it might be. You're missing a big part of it because that frequency, and now I'm going to get real hippy dippy, is like the same thing people countless generations before us felt. And that's the same thing that moved them to think about, okay, how do I really love that, like you said, they had the radio on and they were able to get signal because of the proximity, to Smyrna and stuff like that. How do I bring that sound, that frequency into what I'm already doing, and how do I blend that and meld that? I just think like taking that pause and just listening and just letting that, affect you and really truly hearing the music, hearing the inflections, hearing what would be a verbal dialogue, but that is done in this phraseology is so important. And I just wish people would do that more,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely not hippy dippy. I mean, because look, regardless, what are the slang words we use? I wasn't feeling the vibe. We're not on the same wavelength. These are all
Totally.
sound terms, and we all understand intuitively
Yeah,
in ways when the vibe is there and when the vibe is not there, and
no
or when
doubt.
somebody is. I mean, even something like there's something about somebody's energy that is attractive or not attractive, and a lot of it is, yeah, it's I think it signals that people are on the same like the same wavelength. People are sort of like not in a hurry to go anywhere.
Mhm.
It all connects.
Yeah.
And there is something about like when people go to Greece and they'll
Uh-huh.
go to the village or something like that, and you're away from the sort of like the 9 to 5 job, but the
Mhm.
24/7 work culture of the United States.
Yes.
Okay, whatever. In August, everybody's on Diacope, so like, who
Right.
cares? But still, I mean, there's something about slower lifestyles, and you
Yeah.
see the sort of space that you have to think and to breathe and things like
Mhm.
that. And and it's one of those things. It's like to the point about bringing the Gledi back to you to
Mhm.
wherever you are. I mean, there's something about. I mean, you can't force yourself to have fun, but you can create the
Sure.
circumstances in which fun is likely, right? And
Yeah.
that and if you feel like you can show up to have a party with your friends and you don't have to perform, but you're
Mhm.
just dancing to the kind of music that you'd like to dance to. I mean, there's definitely something to that. You don't have to force anything. And so
Mhm.
we built in Chicago. I mean, because of Adoni, really, we focused on nothing but. I mean, a few things, but the Cyclades for and the Northern Aegean for the last 10 years or so.
Why? Wild.
And
Not
as a
why.
result, it's a immersion
Yeah.
program in a sense where it's
Yeah.
just like you develop the palate for it. You want to hear that stuff, and then you form your own like weird micro community of Nisiotis that
Yes.
are from Peloponnesos or something. It's very
Exactly.
bizarre.
Yeah, but it's
Ultimately from born in the
amazing.
States, right? So,
It's
but there's something
awesome
to
though.
that structure.
Yes. Yes, without a doubt. And I think also like kudos because sometimes we focus on something and then okay, we're going to move on, right? Like but there's so much depth, there's so much to uncover, there's so much there. Like and okay, maybe you do move on. Depends on the type of program you teach too or whatever it might be, but I just think like we have to like go a little bit deeper at times, So kudos to you guys for focusing on it for so long. And I think also for going out and having those lived experiences too. That's I realize not everybody can go to Greece all the time. Obviously, no doubt. There's no, I'm not gonna be a fool for that. But just being able to take people there, to be able to experience this, to feel culturally connected to somebody through music and dance is just an experience that you can't, I don't think anything else replicates. Like you could speak the language perfectly, right? You'll be able to get around, you'll be able to, go to the bank and do your stuff, like do whatever you need to do in Greece. But in my humble opinion, if you can't dance and appreciate the music and at least you don't have to dance, everything, right? But at least try. You're missing a huge part of the culture. Huge, huge. Not debate this, but we have these conversations a lot, and it's come up a whole bunch. Like, if people don't know the music, or excuse me, don't know the language, like some people feel it's a really a huge detriment. Okay, but I would argue if you can dance and um, en- engulf yourself in the culture that way, it's okay that you don't know the language. You know what I mean? Like, yes, sure, obviously, like maybe try to work towards it, right? So you can understand a little bit more of the music, but it doesn't make you a bad dancer if you don't know the words, you know?
Yeah, it's something that you feel and you have to just immerse yourself in,
Mhm.
I mean, because dancing and music are their own languages,
Mhm.
and sure, they all go together, and there are absolutely perks to like, learning Greek, getting into the
Sure.
history of the tradition that you're studying, and also being able to have conversations with musicians, conversations with researchers about,
Yeah.
what their traditions are. It's a huge component, and it opens doors to giving back to those same communities,
Mhm.
which are, I mean, it's, knowing the language is so helpful, but, at the same time, like, you know, to the point about visiting Greece and not having resources, like the first time I went was in 2007. I was 11 years old, and then I didn't go again until 2017. And so I've been to Greece a handful of times now, and mostly because my family did not have the money to go every year. I mean, so it was all more or less self funded,
Absolutely.
and so yeah, and that's a reality. But in
Yeah.
the meantime, people who are interested in music, it starts by creating that same environment at home where you're constantly immersing and listening to the music. I mean, one thing that's very difficult to capture in the music for people who are trained in Western classical
Mhm.
music are quarter tones in Greek music and in Arabic music.
Sure.
And you know, and back to the sort of the question that I get a lot, which is, why is something missing from this music? And 99% of the time, it starts with the quarter tones. There's, there's something about playing a note a little bit flat, that, in the Greek musical system, what they call the it's one thing playing bouzouki. It's not a fretless instrument. There's no microtones in the bouzouki. But on a violin, it's absolutely necessary. I mean, you can't play Naxos authentically without playing quarter tones because of the influence of, you know, uh, not only the existing tradition, but then the influence of Turkish music, which with the Turkish makam system, but also Byzantine music. You can't
Mhm.
sing Byzantine music authentically without quarter tones either. I mean, certainly yes, but still, I mean, and that's why there's so much overlap between those two things. But you develop the ear through listening to it constantly, and then having the right filter for it. Like once you have heard a quarter tone, and you're like, wait, it should sound a little flat, then you hear it everywhere. I had a friend
Yeah.
message me the other day, saying, dude, ever since you pointed out the quarter
Mhm.
tones, like I can't stop hearing them everywhere. And I'm
Yeah.
like, that's
Yeah.
you develop a new filtering mechanism. It's so helpful.
Yeah. I wonder why, like, maybe singing Greek is easier for somebody like me who's never on tune, like, at all. Not that I sing in Greek well either. Like, I'm
Sure,
ready
sure.
to, like, shatter glass, or, like, make the dog, run away. But that's so interesting to think about the quarter tones because I feel like pitch-wise, I'm generally a little bit flat. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? That's
Right.
very
What's the phrase
interesting.
like a broken clock is right twice a day or something?
Hey, I'll take it. I'll take it. 20% right? I'll take it. I'm fine with that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Right.
Shoot. That's like a million times right for me. That's amazing. That's so cool. That's actually really, really interesting to think about. It's kind of giving me pause too about like some of the stuff, that we like pick up and we sing from setas and stuff like that. And definitely in God Brothos you can hear it. I feel like
Oh,
maybe,
yeah.
like that's like how they are in general, all the time. But that's so cool. Well, kind of to tie this whole thing together and at least like a nice little, bow for now, where do you see yourself going in a few years? Like, what is on Izaki's roadmap? Like, what do you want to do?
So, this has been on my agenda for a while, but, I would like to go full immersion in Greece for some time, just really do it, because you can get yourself so far without a teacher and learning through osmosis. And, so one of the things I would like to do is go there for several months and study
Hmm.
under a teacher, just one specific style,
Hmm.
ideally somebody in Naxo, because there's nuances that you can pick up after years and years. But this summer I met Stathis Cyclades for the first time, and he's like 80 years old now, and he's still playing live. He's incredible. And in our very short interaction,
Yeah.
he played a taksimi and then a very famous piece from Asia Minor. And his taksimi, just being there and seeing it, and seeing the certain shortcuts that he was doing on violin, you can kind of pick that up in a YouTube video, but then it's like dancing when you see it in
Hmm.
person, and you just kind of you have the whole holistic view of something.
Yeah.
And so one of the next chapters in the next few years is going there for an extended period of time and working as a musician, and learning from other musicians, and so on. And so it's now it's sort of in the process. I'm in the process of finding ways to sort of be very deliberate about this next step of
Hmm.
immersion, because you know I think that you can only get so far, like I said, self-taught, and really as a musician in the States. And then, but when you really experience it sort of all together, it really takes your dancing to the next level. It takes your music to the next level. Yeah. So that's on the docket within the next three
Okay.
years.
Cool. Cool. I love that. I love that. And lastly, what advice would you give somebody who's listening to this and is like, dang, I want to do that? Or like, this sounds really cool, and may not go into Greece part of it, but just wants to get into music, or wants to be a little bit more deliberate in how they attune themselves and they, work on themselves as a musician. What advice would you
Yeah.
give?
That's a fantastic question. I can answer maybe for Greek folk music broadly.
Hmm.
I would say that for a variety of reasons, different regions of Greece speak to us, you know, based on our experiences, our life experiences, in the same way that some people like rock and some people like rap or something, right? Find that genre that really speaks to you, and follow that, like very follow that. And what I would suggest for anybody looking to um, study music in any way as a member of the sort of Greek American community or the Greek diaspora broadly is, when you find that region, find several people to emulate. So the original way of, there's a story of a violinist in Naxo who explains that a method of teaching is, less of theoretical and more listen to me and steal it. That's exactly how you should approach folk music. You find certain people, you take this technique from somebody, you take this technique from somebody. The
Yeah.
way that you filter it becomes you and your voice eventually, once you've sort of absorbed all those things. And just, yeah, just really, really be very intentional about who you study. And the last component is what I would say for anybody playing a fretless instrument is learn the dromi, learn the makam. There's a
Hmm.
great website called Makam World,
Oh,
which
yes,
actually
yes.
has, yeah, it has all of the families. There are some to focus on Rast,
Yeah.
Usak in Greek, or Bayati in Arabic,
Hmm.
Hijaz, very common, and listen to it, and then listen to improvisations of people
Hmm.
sort of riffing on those makam. And then I think that will give you all the tools that you need to in order to thrive as a musician or to learn deeply. I wish I had somebody sort of tell me this, or even as much internet access as I do now,
All right.
when I was 10 years old. So
All right.
I would start with that, and really just immerse yourself like you would language. Music is a language.
Yeah. Awesome. Izaki, thank you so much. This was fantastic. I'm so excited that we were able to do, a music-based episode and really focus on that. And so appreciative that you're like sharing your craft and, your talents. And I can't wait to see you at HDF this year. I think it's going to be fantastic again.
It'd be fun. New Orleans.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I know. And isn't that a great place to like, bring in some really cool music and stuff like that? Like New
Yeah.
Orleans jazz scene is just so great down there. And even sort of that like swampy jazz. You know what I mean? It's not like real. I mean, it's real jazz, but it's not like the stuff that you would open up a can and that's your jazz. It's quite different. So it's going to be cool to see like the blend of that and how New Orleans kind of influences a little bit HDF and vice versa.
Yeah.
It'll be fun this
Absolutely.
year.
It's going to be a
But
blast.
yes, thank you so much. I appreciate you so much.